You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast. And welcome to Spookulative Evolution.
Hello, David.
Release the new series of Spook-E, Will.
And hello, listeners. Welcome
to Spook-E. Spookulative Evolution, back for 2020.
It's back. We have a new series of spooky episodes where we are going to look at the speculative evolution of certain monsters, myths, and creatures.
Yes.
This series, we are doing sea monsters.
Oh, and boy, are we excited.
Yes. Now, a quick intro for anyone who might be new to Spook-E. The point of this series is to explore speculative evolution. When we do thought experiments, mental exercises around the concept of evolution, how things could evolve, how they might evolve, alternate evolutions for things. It's just thought experiments. Mm-hmm. But we're applying it to monsters.
Because it's October.
And the month for monsters.
We've done 2 series before.
Mm-hmm.
The first was classic movie monsters.
Yeah, vampires, werewolves, fish people, and zombies.
The next was monsters of Greek mythology. Hydras, harpies, gorgons, and chimeras.
Yeah.
So now we're back with sea monsters. Hey, if you want a more thorough discussion of speculative evolution, we did it in episode 39.
So the goal of these episodes is that each episode, for all of the remaining Saturdays of this month, we will be taking a look at a particular sea monster and look at how could something like that evolve? How could something similar to that, something that resembles the description for it, evolve? How could its features, its behaviors, how could we achieve something, resembling or approximating this monster only using the tools of natural selection and evolution?
Right. The same way somebody might go, how can I build this creature out of Legos?
Yes.
We are going to build this creature out of processes of natural selection.
So the goal is to be fun. We aren't making any definitive statements about how these creatures would have evolved or what they actually were.
No, don't cite us.
Yes, exactly. This is our version of this monster for the spooky verse, as the fans have dubbed it.
Oh, so good.
Right? I'm just makes
4
me so
more
happy.
creatures coming up.
For this series, we're doing sea monsters. This is a group that is kind of self-explanatory. It's monsters of the deep sea. Typically, these are the monsters that stories were told by sailors, brought back to shore during the early days of sailing, when they'd come back with tales of giant creatures, mysterious beings. We're going to take a look at 4 of the classics in that category, starting with probably the most iconic, or at least the most described and definitive of the monsters, the Kraken.
The Kraken, or as I've recently learned, some people call it the Kraken.
The Kraken. Yeah, I have heard that before.
Yeah.
The Kraken, most of us have heard of the Kraken, if only for the quote you used at the beginning.
Release the Kraken. What was that? Clash of the Titans?
Clash of the Titans.
2016 or something,
yeah.
the film?
And there was the classic Clash of the Titans that originally used that line.
Oh, was that line in the original one too?
Yeah.
Oh, well, how about that?
With the old stop-motion claymation Kraken.
Very nice.
Which we will talk about, because that does have to do with a bit of our understanding of the history of this creature. But a basic intro for those who may not be familiar with the Kraken.
Yeah, we always start Spook-E with delving into what is our source material?
Yes.
What is the information that we're using to base our thought experiment on? Which is especially helpful for me because I'm here to learn.
Yes.
Will does the background on this stuff. I get to sit here and think about stuff.
And so this history is also what will fuel our speculative evolution later on in the episode. So let's meet the Kraken. Typically, the Kraken is a giant cephalopod, octopus, squid. It is the one you classically see attacking ships with the arms coming up out of the water and surrounding the ship.
Yep.
Pulling down masts and pulling down sailors and breaking the ship in half. It's the monster from the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie. It's the classic monster from 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yes, 20,000 even.
Yes, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And has been in lots of other films in one form or another, books and series and games, so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's a Dungeons and Dragons version of the Kraken.
Basically, anytime you see a giant squid or octopus, it's a reference to the Kraken. And that is what most of the stories describe the Kraken as throughout history. Though there are some that were a bit more vague, that it was a giant creature, but they describe it almost more crustacean-y with like, horny, armored, spiny limbs. But those are kind of rare. Typically, it is very clearly described as a giant octopus or squid, sometimes even cuttlefish.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, which we'll get into more. Now, the history of the Kraken is not as old as most people might think. It's not ancient Greek.
Oh.
It is not a Greek monster. Even though it was used in the movie Clash of the Titans, which is a Greek tale, the stories of the Kraken does not quite go back that far. The story the movie Clash of the Titans is retelling, their version of the story, is really the story of Perseus, who is the character in the movie. And in the classic story of Perseus, he does indeed fight a sea monster, but it is Cetus, a different sea monster, not described as a cephalopod, not described as a octopus or squid-like creature, just a big sea monster. And that's the sea monster that he kills, spoiler alerts for anyone who hasn't heard of or seen Clash of the Titans, that he kills with Medusa's head by turning it to stone. That a Princess Andromeda was going to be sacrificed to, not the Kraken. The movie used the name the Kraken.
Right, for brand marketability.
Yep, and so that famous quote, "Release the Kraken," is just cinema.
Gotcha.
So it's actually still old, but a bit more recent, going back to the 1100s, from tales of Norwegian sailors.
Oh.
So that's really when the Kraken starts showing up, is from the waters of Norway, which has huge sailing tradition. That's a big part of their history, so it makes sense that they would bring back big sea monster stories. And a lot of the earliest stories of the Kraken come from then. And when they describe the Kraken, it is not just like a really big octopus. When we think of the Kraken, we think of like, something ship-sized, something big enough to take out a ship. Most of the old stories of Krakens describe it as the biggest thing in the ocean.
Right. It's not a Kraken.
No.
It's the Kraken.
The Kraken, and it would like dwarf a blue whale.
Right. This is a deity of the sea.
Yes, exactly. This is truly monstrous. Beyond gargantuan is what I've heard them described as.
And indeed, in the current, at least, edition of Dungeons & Dragons, the Kraken is described very similarly as just this monstrously colossal elemental beast, a force of nature.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like you do not fight the Kraken. You do not, ever see the entire creature.
Right. Only if you're, level 20 characters.
Yes, exactly. And that's very much what these old stories are like, is that when the Kraken surfaces, the part you see of it is massive, taking up, like a mile of surface, and it is but a part of the creature.
Right.
So old stories make the Kraken just ungodly big. And these stories kind of continued as normal sea monster stories, and actually got more attention in a certain way in the 18th century. So like the Kraken stories have a long history of being taken seriously, which is another kind of interesting thing about sea monsters versus the other creatures we've talked about. Like, there was a time vampires were considered to be real. There was a time werewolves were considered to be real, and there are certain cultures that believed in zombies. But it's not like it wasn't a widely held or longly held, I don't know the time limit for each of them, but sea monsters, there were people who believed very, very readily in sea monsters just a couple hundred years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was like a legit worry when you went out to the water. So sea monsters have had a slightly more interesting place in our human history, our storytelling history, because we were legitimately scared of them for a long time. In the 18th century, so 1700s, the Kraken started getting more attention from scientists, where it was being considered as a scientific fact for a while. Carl Linnaeus describes the Kraken
wow.
in his writings. And he includes it among mollusks and cephalopods. So like he is definitively saying, yes, there is a monstrous cephalopod out there, a species of Kraken.
Wow. So Carolus Linnaeus, famously the father of biological classification.
Yeah, so like...
Cool.
The Kraken held a place in semi-modern science for a while, to the point that multiple people were quote-unquote experts on the Kraken. A bishop from Bergen, Erik Pontoppidan, wrote The Natural History of Norway in 1752, which describes a ton of sea creatures and ocean life, and has a section on the Kraken. So once again, this is official documents. This is like you going to the library, grabbing a book on animals, and flipping to the section about dragons.
Yeah.
That's what it's like for Krakens during this time. And the reason this is super cool for our purposes is they've collected detailed descriptions and eyewitness accounts of Krakens and sightings and what it's like.
Wow. So this is like an old school cryptid.
Yes. This is indeed an old school cryptid with a just ridiculous history. So what are some of the things they describe? Because it's really interesting.
I can't wait.
Some of the first things they say is that, once again, when you see the Kraken, you are typically only seeing a small portion.
Mm-hmm.
You don't usually see the entire animal. One of the descriptions they give is that its back appears to be 1.5 miles in circumference.
Whew.
And can look like a series of small islands with the parts that are breaking the surface.
Cool.
And there's often many stories of people mistaking the Kraken for a series of islands. So like seeing a small little archipelago and thinking it's land and then approaching the Kraken. There are some descriptions that describe it with points or horns. So it sometimes has kind of ornamentation on it. Some of these describe to be the size of the masts of sailing ships. Arms powerful enough to take down ships, pretty standard Kraken stuff. But the really interesting thing is that they actually describe the behavior of a Kraken surfacing. That there are signs, telltale things that you can see and expect when a Kraken comes to the surface. I got a lot of this from Sir William Jardine's book, a Scottish naturalist who wrote The Naturalist's Library, and he also had a section on the Kraken at the end of his naturalist section of sea life.
Man, I have an image in my head of like a 1700s version of zoo books.
Yeah.
With the Kraken.
The book is called The Mammalia and Amphibious Carnivora, and the last 2 sections is the Kraken and Sea Serpent.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And he details a lot in here, which was very handy, that when a Kraken is about to surface, you know it because if you're fishing, you'll start catching abundance of fish as they are being chased to the surface by the massive creature coming up.
Interesting.
And then, once it surfaces, you'll immediately be able to notice a very foul stench. They often describe it having strong, foul smells, which it evidently uses to attract fish. And these smells have been attributed to its droppings, which it uses to bait fish in and then feed upon them, which then makes more droppings, which attracts more fish. So, like, that it is using its own feces as bait.
Really fascinating.
Right?
Wow.
And that in these descriptions, the danger of the Kraken actually isn't it attacking the ships. Though there are many stories of it attacking sailing vessels. For these accounts from these 2 researchers? Philosophers. They say the real danger is when the Kraken dives back down, because it will create a whirlpool that will pull any vessel in the nearby area down with it.
Oh, okay.
Now, at this point, we didn't believe it was a Kraken. They thought it was a species of animal.
Right, they were trying to make sense of these stories in the light of the actual behavior and natural history of a real creature.
Absolutely. And by this point, it was very common to see the Kraken referred to as a cuttlefish, as a giant cuttlefish. Now, I don't know whether the term cuttlefish became, at that point, was more common term for cephalopods.
Right, maybe that meant
like
octopuses and squids.
Exactly, maybe that
general.
Was a more popular term at that point. Like, there was even one paper I found that was titled Colossal Cuttlefish, and it was describing the stories of the Kraken. And these were, at this point, a bit more reasonable. So they were recognizing that some of the more historical tales may have been more exaggerated, but they were still taking them as solid evidence, functioning under the mentality of, well, you can't just discount this many eyewitness testimonies.
Right.
There has to be something to this. Even though we've never found a cuttlefish 120 feet long, which is the size cited in one of the books, they still could not just write it off when so many sailors were coming back with stories.
Right.
And they even had tales of sailors in the Indian seas, like native sailors, carrying hatchets on their canoes to cut off the arms of these giant cuttlefish when they came up to attack their boats.
Right. And then presumably bring them back as spectacle.
Yes. Now, part of what also fueled this belief in the giant cuttlefish, the colossal cuttlefish, is that we have giant cephalopods.
Mm-hmm.
There are indeed very large specimens of cephalopods. Now, the biggest cuttlefish doesn't get nearly the size described in any of these, or even human size. The giant cuttlefish, or Australian cuttlefish, gets to be about 20 inches long at the mantle, and which is about 50 centimeters. So that's the main portion of the body, not including the arms, which can adjust their length. And with an overall weight of about 23 pounds, or just about 10 kilograms.
It's a big cuttlefish.
So it's big.
But no kraken.
We do continue to get bigger as we visit some of the other groups. The giant Pacific octopus is the largest octopus, with adults on average weighing about 33 pounds or 15 kilograms, and an arm span, so when they stretch their arms out, of 14 feet or not quite 4.5 meters.
Oof.
Yes. No, the ones we had at the aquarium would very regularly have an arm span equivalent to my own.
Yeah.
We had 3 to 4 foot long GPOs, is the shorthand for them. And so when they spread their arms out, they could have matched my 6 foot arm span.
Wow. Big octopus, but no kraken.
Though there are records, the largest measured individual was up to 110 pounds, 50 kilograms.
Wow.
And a span of 20 feet, 6 meters.
Wow.
So, like, they can be 10 foot long, and there are reports that there could be larger, but not confirmed.
Okay. But yet, no kraken.
Still not a kraken. The true culprits that get compared to the kraken and that are blamed for the origins by many, though there's no way for us to know that this is where these origins came from. It could just be that someone saw an octopus and was so freaked out about it, they started having nightmares of giant octopuses out in the ocean. There's a YouTube channel called Monstrum, which does this part of our episode, but that's their whole series, is the history of monsters, and it's amazing. They have an episode on the Kraken, and they talk about, they tell a story of Victor Hugo in one of his books just going off on a tangent for one chapter about how much he hates octopus. Octopuses because of how creepy they are. But the giant and colossal squid are the biggest living invertebrates today, and they are the biggest cephalopods today, and they do get to kind of monstrous sizes. Many people blame them for likely origins, or as the likely origins of the Kraken stories. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, was first discovered as remains that washed up on a beach in 1853.
Right, like a carcass.
Yes, this is the first time it was scientifically recognized. But sailors have had interactions with these animals, and this still happens with fishermen today, where they will hook these animals because they typically live very deep down, like 1,000 to 2,000 meters down.
Yeah, very deep down.
Deep down, but if you're fishing deep down, or one happens to be becoming more shallow and you hook it, they can be brought to the surface, and they typically don't survive the ascent.
Right.
They depressurize too quickly and it kills them. So there are stories of people briefly encountering giant squid, and then they either fall apart or they die, so they don't get the giant squid. But these are squid that can reach lengths of 16 feet long, 5 meters, on average, but maximum lengths have been described for 40 feet long, so 12 to 13 meters.
Yeah.
For females, and only 30 feet long, 10 meters for males.
And we're talking from the tip of their mantle down to the end of their arms.
Yes. And for this one, it's also including the 2 long tentacles. So, fun fact, for anyone who hasn't listened to our Cephalopods episode, octopus.
16.
Yes. Episode 16, we discuss octopus have 8 arms. Squids have 8 arms and 2 feeder tentacles. The long tentacles that they shoot out to grab food. And cuttlefish also have those feeder tentacles. So, down to the end of those long tentacles, we could have a 40-foot squid.
Which is, now we're getting kraken sized.
Yep.
Because that's the length of a whale.
You also get more monstery features in that for many of them, their suckers can be lined with tooth-like structures, And on the colossal squid, which is similar size to the giant, but not as long, yet heavier.
Okay.
So it's more massive. It is the most massive of invertebrates, with a confirmed weight of up to 1,000 pounds,
Cool.
400, almost 500 kilograms. While our giant squid typically only reaches about 600 pounds, not quite 300 kilograms.
Yeah.
Measly. The colossal squid's tentacles are ended with hooks. Swiveling hooks like the size of a tiger's claw. So these are pretty monstrous. Now, our understanding of them was not good for most of the time we've known about them, because we usually only found them washed up on the beach as carcasses.
Mm-hmm.
Typically not in one piece, typically beat up.
And eventually our science, as science developed, we learned to stop taking the word
Yes.
of people coming back from sea as reliable descriptions of things after many, many centuries of people coming back with stories of mile-long cephalopods.
Yeah, and so it's over time, the idea of the Kraken diminished, but there was still a lot of mystery surrounding these giant cephalopods, the giant squids. So there still was a little bit of mystique. Like, I even remember as a kid there being a little bit of like, well, there are giant squids, and we don't know how big they get.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how they hunt or what they hunt. We've never watched them hunt. We've never been able to study gut contents. We've never been able to document it. So, who knows? So, like, even within our lifetimes, there was still a little bit of that, like, you can't rule it out.
Right. We don't know. They could be 100 feet.
Yeah. So, though we never wouldn't call it a Kraken anymore, those kinds of stories almost persisted even to that point, which is not like good from a scientific perspective, but is kind of admirable. Just like the Kraken has really lodged itself in our psyche.
It's an enduring story.
Absolutely.
Well, it also fits into that cool history of stories of people out in the world can not only be the basis of myths and legends, but can also actually lead us to really fascinating realities about the world.
Absolutely.
That for a long time, if you kind of parse out the god squid kind of features, people would have been coming back with like, there is some sort of really giant squid out there that ultimately we were able to confirm and sort of zero in on which of these stories actually are telling us facts about the ocean.
Absolutely. And, it's fairly reasonable on how a giant cephalopod could get turned monster, because there are accounts of people being quote-unquote attacked. Usually it's an octopus, either reacted to a person or was curious and grabs a scuba diver. And there are the Humboldt Squids, which don't get as big as a giant squid. They're only about as long as me, 6 foot long, so 2 meters. But they are aggressive hunters and have been known to attack people that get in the water with them while they're hunting at night.
Yeah, when they're in hunting mode.
Yes, while they're looking for food, if a hand gets in the way, they've been known to come and take a bite out of it with that famous cephalopod beak.
Oops.
That was one of the big questions with the giant squid, was how did it hunt? There was lots of speculation on whether it was an ambush predator, whether it was a pursuit predator, it chased its food down. Some thought that it might have used its long tentacles to like sneak into schools of fish and grab a fish.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. Until we got video footage in 2005, only 15 years ago, we finally got actual behavioral footage and found that they are basically just big squid. They are fast, they're agile, they're active hunters, it seems. So if you've ever seen a little squid zipping around like a torpedo, just scale that up 20 feet and you've got a giant squid. So that's kind of the background for the Kraken. The stories told about it, but also the potential influences for it.
Yeah.
So now we got to evolve our own Kraken.
What a task that faces us.
Right? This one's interesting because we've been given the animal, basically.
Right. Our options really are to either pick a different origin point and convergently evolve cephalopods. Or start with cephalopods and see how do we get something that is a cephalopod that fits the image of the Kraken.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably going to be the way to go.
Yeah.
Well, because it's funny, because like you said, we've been given the animal, which means we get to be a little more specific, and we get to sort of expound a bit on the diversity of this group and how you might get something out of that group.
Absolutely. And there's lots of cool stuff. There was lots of parallels that I immediately thought of when going through the stories of the Kraken. The first one that jumped out to me was when they said that a surfaced Kraken can often be mistaken as islands.
Right.
And if anyone knows anything about cephalopods, one of their big things is camouflage.
Yes.
Like, so you could absolutely have a giant cephalopod, specifically octopus or cuttlefish, which can not only change their color, but the texture of their skin.
Sure can.
Could come up and hide as a floating island and potentially go mostly unnoticed.
Yeah. So if we're starting with cephalopods, right, this is our evolutionary origin. Let's all right, cephalopoda
Yes.
is from whence we will originate this creature. We have octopuses, we have squid, we have cuttlefish, and the groups that we haven't named yet are the shelled cephalopods.
Yes, indeed.
So today we have nautiluses, of which there are very few, but they have coiled shells and a kind of a squid face sticking out of them. And then in the fossil record, there's all sorts of diversity of shelled cephalopods.
Yeah, with curly, straight, curved, corkscrewed shells and everything in between.
Absolutely. Now, when you were talking, obviously the big parallels sound like squid with their long arms and tentacles, octopus, like you said, with that versatility, cuttlefish, which it's fantastic and fascinating.
Right.
But you also mentioned a few times the stories of the Kraken having horns.
Yes, it's very
or
true.
Sort of tough structures. You mentioned that a few descriptions of it describe it almost like a crustacean. Which makes me wonder if there's not an angle to come at this from a shelled cephalopod, if not necessarily a fully nautilus shelled, but there are cephalopods today that retain portions, aspects of the shell. Like the cuttlefish has that, quote, cuttle bone.
Yep.
And I believe squids have
like a cartilage structure.
Right. So I kind of like this idea of a cephalopod that retains some of that harder structure.
Which I think is a good angle. There was also the point to be said, because my idea with the horns, because I also was like, all right, we gotta touch on that at least.
Right, how do you get horns?
Is if you've ever watched like a giant Pacific octopus or, similar octopus, a lot of times they will produce little horns with their skin over their eyes, little protuberances.
Oh, you got a good point.
They can like raise these, not just bumps, but almost spines that would be super soft if you touched them. And so it could be something where they can produce those horn-looking structures, but they're not actually permanent nor horn.
Interesting. That coming at it from the camouflage angle is interesting because it also... All right, I'm going to go in a little bit of a weird direction.
That's what we're here for.
That's this... Listen, if we're talking octopuses, and we have a creature with a variety of differing accounts of what they look like and how they seem and what parts they have, octopuses are pretty expert at making their bodies look different from what their bodies look like.
I mean, there is the Mimic Octopus,
which is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
This is an octopus that will variably shape itself to look like a fish or a sea snake or a chunk of coral. And there is kind of a fun thought to be had of like, all right, maybe what you thought was one giant tentacle was actually several tentacles.
Yes.
Together in the shape of one.
Yeah.
And maybe what you thought were horns were either the arms
acting like spines,
acting like that, or the texture change that you're describing. Maybe this is an animal. It's a common behavior across many animals to make themselves look bigger and more intimidating than they actually are. Maybe our spooky Kraken is a cephalopod, octopus or some other, that has behaviorally evolved to take on more monstrous features than it actually has.
Yes, absolutely. it could be an intimidation or a defense mechanism. And I like that because it also gives the variability to the stories and stuff, which is nice.
It's not necessarily variable as a population. It's their individuals are variable.
Yes.
It's an octopus or something similar, and it just keeps changing itself.
Now, I had another idea while going through the notes at this time that jumped into my head when I mentioned the Humboldts, which I didn't have in my notes initially. I'd forgotten about them until we were recording, and then I remembered one of the cool things with Humboldts and other squid is that they're actually semi-cooperative.
Ooh.
They move as groups, and there's some evidence, at least from my understanding, that Humboldts may use at least some form of like pack hunting or kind of cooperative hunting.
Okay, some sort of gregariousness.
Yeah, there are certain things that they can flash their colors, bright white, and they seem to do that right before an attack, similar to like sailfish that seem to signal their attacks to avoid colliding with another Humboldt squid as an attack happens. So there's some social interaction going while they hunt. And there's lots of squid that school together.
Yes.
Even if they aren't hunting as a group, they're moving as a group. And so if we had some large social cephalopods that when they surfaced, you only saw part of the body because the rest of it was beneath the water, because you're really only seeing the backs of like 5 or 6 out of the dozen.
That's true.
You could have a kraken that is really about 20 giant cephalopod.
And I kind of so combining that with what I said before, the idea of a squid or octopus that would wrap 2, 3, or 4 of its arms together to look like one big arm. If you have a bunch of them, then yeah, you could have sailors coming back going like, no, I know Phil says it looked like multiple arms at once, but I saw 7 of them. Mm-hmm. There were definitely enough. Definitely 1 squid's worth of arms that we saw.
It's exactly. And so you could get cool stuff. I also like that because the fish rushing to the surface makes me think of whales.
Right, I was going to say
dolphins.
That's cool because that's a thing that actually happens. Mm-hmm. There are certain seabirds will actually look for that when whales or dolphins will end up herding fish toward the surface. Because for a whale or dolphin, pushing your fish toward the surface is backing them against a wall.
Yeah, that you have cut off that route of escape because they can't fly.
Right, they can't move, they can't go any further up. And there are birds that will hang out and wait and look for that, and then they'll dive in to grab the near surface fish.
So we had like pack hunting squid or cuttlefish. They could be actively herding fish to the surface like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of social behavior when I was talking about octopus stuff, and I was like, well, I'll hold off on that because I don't want to invoke social behavior if there isn't any. Mm-hmm. But that's good to know.
Yeah, and cuttlefish don't school the same way squid do, from my understanding, because squid are torpedoes.
Right.
Like when they move, they move. Yeah. So they can actually. There's lots of squid that live during the day down deep, and then swim thousands of feet, or maybe not thousands, hundreds of feet up to the surface to hunt at night, and then swim hundreds of feet back down. But lots of cuttlefish are like, I live on this reef, and this is the reef I live on, and I hover, So, though they're not schooling, cuttlefish very often are social.
Right. Living in groups to at least some degree.
And they have big mating displays when mating season comes around where they'll be competing with one another. So you'll have like dozens of cuttlefish all together during a big mating event. They're not typically cooperative. My friend at the aquarium said that the difficulty with keeping cuttlefish is that they are both social and cannibalistic. So you can't have a single cuttlefish alone because it's unhealthy for it. It will become its version of depressed. But if you have a whole bunch, you just have to every now and then restock the cuttlefish that are in there because they'll eat the small ones.
Oops.
If they get hungry. And so there is a sociality. Octopi or octopuses are really the one that is notoriously antisocial. Does not hang out with other octopuses.
Yeah.
But cuttlefish and squid, there's room for social behavior that we could build on.
Okay. Interesting. Now, we're talking about group living, possibly explaining some of the vastness of this animal, either with threat displays or with multiple of them being together. but I also suspect that we would be doing a disservice to our evolved Kraken if they weren't at least actually pretty big.
Yes. No, because we can still have them be sizable.
Which brings up the question that I've been wondering this entire discussion. What selective pressures drive invertebrates, drive cephalopods to get large enough that a person goes, wow, that's real big?
Deep sea gigantism.
I was thinking deep sea gigantism.
Mm-hmm.
Or the other thing I thought is when you were talking about how the origins of the stories are Norwegian.
Yeah.
Northern waters.
Yes.
Where you're cold. So we've talked about, in the main episodes every now and then, we'll talk about body temperature regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And although I don't know how often we've used this term, there is a term known as gigantothermy.
Yes.
Which is when an animal is big enough that it is retaining heat better just by virtue of being huge.
Yeah, that now you have more mass, so you don't cool off as quickly.
Right.
Just because physics doesn't work that way.
So being big can be helpful for thermoregulation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same reason
that is one of the reasons for
deep
sea gigantism is that deep sea's colder temperatures, so that would fit the Norwegian waters as well as deep waters.
Right, and it could also explain, maybe they're deeper in the tropics, but they're shallow. They can hang out in shallower waters up north.
Well, and especially if they're doing the smaller squid thing of living down deep, but then coming up at certain times to hunt. At night is when they hunt, where you're more likely to not tell what you're seeing very well from a ship. Another reason that they give for deep sea gigantism is food scarcity.
Okay.
That, at least from initial observations, larger organisms tend to do better with not having regular food, that they can take advantage of the long distance between meals better than a smaller organism that would starve very quickly.
Gotcha. Okay.
And this also could benefit that if you're big, your babies can be big, and a bigger baby can also survive better in that environment, both from being able to travel farther in this food scarce environment down deep, because the deep ocean's like a desert.
Right.
But also that would reduce predation.
Yes.
Having big babies makes them less likely to be eaten. So there's a benefit from defense, even if the squid's not being eaten, which it is by sperm whale.
Yep.
But even if it's not being eaten by most animals, its baby would be. But if it's bigger, it might have a better chance.
Yeah. Which was the other thing I was going to bring up is we've been talking about big size, we've been talking about threat display, we've been talking about camouflage, which are all things that suggest that there's things to be afraid of, which raises the question of, well, what does an enormous Kraken-sized organism have to be afraid of? To which I will posit three potential answers.
Yep.
One, whales.
Whales.
All right, sperm whales.
The sperm whales, we know hunt giant squid. We have bellies full of squid beaks.
Yep.
Scars on the face from squid tentacles. We know it happens.
Yep. And sperm whales are the largest macro predators.
The largest, toothy predator. I'm using my teeth to catch food.
in the world today.
Yep.
Option number two, other krakens.
Yep, cannibalism.
You just mentioned it there.
They use, I think, in one of the videos, one of the very few live videos we have of a giant squid was attracted by a dead squid.
Yes, I remember. Yeah, I remember that video. And then a third one, which I'll throw out there because it's fun. I refer to the stories of megafaunal trees.
Oh yeah, yep.
And fruits, which are plants whose seeds and fruits seem to have been adapted to be transported by large herbivores that don't exist anymore.
Yeah, that are too big for our animals around today.
Also related to the maybe this is true story of the North American pronghorn, which some have suggested may be as fast as it is because there used to be a cheetah-style big cat in the continent before they went extinct during the Ice Age. That may have driven those pronghorns to those speeds that they still retain. One might posit that if these big kraken animals evolved during a time where they had bigger predators to worry about, it could have driven that selective pressure to be big, which they retained even in the absence of those ancient predators.
Exactly, yeah. So if they were dealing with megalodon-sized predators...
Right, and I was going to say, our options thus become... depending on how far back we want
Yep.
to go, we can go back just a few million years and use Megalodon as our excuse.
Yup.
Giant shark. We can go back to the early Cenozoic and use early whales like Basilosaurus.
Mm-hmm.
Or, if we want to get real fun with it, we can go all the way back to the Mesozoic and say mosasaurs and giant ichthyosaurs.
Yeah.
Which could also be a fun challenge. And in fact, you could even suggest these are animals that were driven either or and blah, 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 to big sizes and living in the deep sea
Yep.
by the presence of other large carnivores.
You could also work the social aspect into that. Schooling is very often typically a defense against predators, not a tool for hunting.
That's true.
So you could have had big cephalopods that then had to respond to bigger predators and started living in a group together.
And none of these have to be mutually exclusive. It could be that it starts out one way.
Yeah, I start getting big because of that big predator.
Right. And then I moved, and it turns out I can survive better in the deep sea with my big size. And now I'm actually doing pretty well down here in the deep sea. And these different selective pressures are kind of compounding on each other.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of good reasons why they could be big. And like we can make them a bit bigger. There was one paper I found that said, though the max sizes we found for giant squid are just over 10 meters, a 20-meter squid is not unreasonable based on what we understand about them. So like there could be 20-meter giant squids as far as we understand. We haven't found them.
Right.
But that measurement is not something that scientists, or at least that paper, balked at.
Right. Theoretically, this doesn't seem physically ridiculous.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked about squid, we've talked about cuttlefish, we've talked about octopus, but we've also talked a lot about mimicry and texture changing and stuff like that, which I don't know how much we see that in squids.
We see lots of color changing.
Right.
And so they use their color changes, but from my understanding, it's typically communication.
Right.
It's usually a show either as a group or two individuals within the group.
And then cuttlefish are super cool.
Yep.
But when I think long tentacles, Kraken style coming up out of the water, cuttlefish tentacles, to my knowledge, tend not to be particularly long.
Yeah, well, not well, and that actually goes for both squid and cuttlefish. Like, octopus has really long arms compared to its mantle. So the mantle is the body of a cephalopod. That's what you would think of as the back of its head, but that's really the whole body. And then the face is surrounded by the arms. And so octopus have a fairly small mantle and very long arms. Squid have a long mantle, fairly short arms, but then long feeding tentacles. And cuttlefish are kind of more on the squid side, with just not quite as long a mantle. And I'm sure that this is my general average knowledge. I've not done measurements.
Right.
But cuttlefish do still have those feeding tentacles, those long, hydraulically powered tentacles that they can shoot out to grab food.
Okay.
So really, the octopus is the one that gives us those long reaching arms. But if we are going with the arms, another thought I had about it is we always see in the pictures in the movies them raising out of the water like cobras and wrapping around the ship, which is not how it would work. True. They'd be slithering up the side of the ship because an octopus can't hold its arms weight up out of the water, unless they're very small. A big one wouldn't be able to raise it up like a cobra, so it'd be more coming along the walls of the ship over the deck.
Yeah.
Spilling like a reverse oil spill.
Now that brings up the question, moving into, okay, now we have possibilities for why it's big, where the stories come from, why those features come from. What drives a cephalopod to seemingly attack a ship?
Yeah.
This is a big part of the story here of the Kraken takes ships down, and not like canoes, like big, right? The Black Pearl, taking down ships. Why would our creatures, our hypothetically evolved Kraken cephalopods, do that?
Yeah, why would they mess with something so big?
And I have a few ideas, a couple things in mind. Number one, I will draw from snakes, because this is one of the things you will often hear is stories of snakes crawling into people's boats to attack them, which of
Yep.
course that's not what they're doing. Usually it's because they're trying to get out of the water.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm tired of swimming, here's a place to go.
I'm too cold, I want to warm up.
So it could be that our cephalopods want to leave the water.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's where we bring in our predator, other krakens are getting them out there. Which,
It would have to be octopus if we go that route.
yeah, because they can.
They're the only one that can do that.
But then the other one going on the octopus route, that the first idea that I had is that octopus are notoriously curious.
Yes, curiosity is really big.
And it could easily be, let's see what's up here.
Yeah. It's the investigative bite by sharks.
Right.
That wasn't a shark attack that you just reported in the news. It was a shark investigation. It came over and taste tested you. It felt you with its teeth, and it tasted what you were, and then it left. So it could be the Kraken's version of that. Another idea, though, I had is fishing vessels were in many of the stories of you'll know the Kraken's up because you'll start catching more fish, and you'll start seeing more fish on the surface. And today, fishing vessels are quote-unquote attacked by lots of animals. Orcas and even whale sharks are known to go tear holes in nets and steal fish. So if you were pulling in a bunch of fish that the Kraken or Krakens wanted, you might be quote-unquote attacked, as they're really just trying to steal your catch, but they're pulling on the net, they're rocking the ship. So maybe the stories of them sinking vessels are exaggerated, but the stories of them violently attacking vessels is really just them coming for a free meal.
Right. And that makes me think, again, two different examples. One is the Humboldt squid, which you pointed out, when trying to catch fish, will bite a hand if it shows up there.
And if you're a giant squid going for fish and a person falls in the water next to you, why wouldn't you be like, are you fish?
Right, you're the size of a tuna.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thought that that could come up is it's very tempting to bring in the real-life trait of cephalopods that they are very intelligent.
I like that because that also can go with the curiosity of, oh, is that a bag of food?
And it could even be, potentially, a step further than that. You could have these Kraken cephalopods learn to associate boats with food.
Oh, yeah, and so they end up checking a boat.
And you go, hey, do you have any fish up there?
Are you fishing?
Anything up there?
Yeah. I like that.
Which is very much like, well, it's why you don't feed the bears.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like feeding wildlife is now they just associate wooden vessels with, maybe there's a free meal.
Yeah. And so your boat kind of making its way over to the popular fishing spot might go, hey, is that a bunch of islands over there?
Mm-hmm.
And no, it's these... They're waiting.
Yeah, exactly.
They also came up because they know where the boats come to fish.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. That they're effectively ambushing fishing boats. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and it could be that you could have certain spots or certain times of the year where they come out of the depths.
Yeah.
That maybe they do spend most of their time down deep, and then either at particularly prolific times of the year, or we've used this excuse before, during mating season.
Absolutely.
It could be that the Kraken is a group of cephalopods that have gotten together for mating season.
Yeah, it's like a bunch of males traveling to the mating grounds, or a bunch of ready to mate or already mated, and now having to nurse eggs.
Right.
Females.
Yeah, either it could be a bunch of males like, all right, we got to get ready for our fights that we're going to have by fueling up on food, or it could be a bunch of females going, no, we're going to be making eggs, we got to get ready on food.
Yeah. And if it's females, we can make them bigger.
Yes, we can, absolutely. And I love the idea of it's just the females become active and they risk coming up to the surface where there's more competition and where there's more predators up there.
Well, and that also works really nicely if we are going that it's a group of them. If it's a group of, recently or soon to be pregnant females stocking up on their fat reserves, they can be traveling together, to move to the mating grounds, if there's a specific spot. But also another explanation for it could be a group spawning, which lots of animals do, is they lay their eggs all at once so that predators can't raid a nest. There's too many nests, some babies will make it. And so that's another reason they could be grouped together, is we're going to lay our eggs at the same time. They don't spawn out into the water like other animals. They lay them in places, but still, now we can all kind of protect our eggs as a kraken instead of a individual.
And that I really like, because now we have a solid reason for threat displays.
Absolutely.
For shaping yourself to look more intimidating, or for making yourself look bigger, right? You're being protective of yourself, each other, and your eggs that you're laying now.
Yeah, so you could end up having a spot where any small vessel that comes above it gets suddenly threat displayed at.
Right. And now we have another potential reason why they're trying to ward off the ships.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, you're going into their mating grounds, and it would make sense that they're congregating where all the fish are and all the food is, so they're getting in the way of these ships.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've given a bunch of different reasons why they could be encountering the vessels, but I like that. I like the idea that a kraken is an intentionally congregating swarm of already very large cephalopods.
Mm-hmm.
And it is their probably semi-intentional, we are looking much bigger than we actually are.
Yeah.
Group display.
Absolutely. I love it. That Kraken's the name of the group, not actually an animal.
A kraken of cephalopods.
A kraken of cephalopods.
It's like a lek.
Yes.
That's a lot of fun.
I really like that. All right, so I'm cool with that. I like that a lot. Yeah. So which cephalopod do we go with?
I'm leaning towards octopus.
Octopus?
And I know we're breaking modern octopus rules with social behavior, which they don't typically do today.
Yeah.
But I can't. The versatility of display.
It is very true.
And those long arms coming up, that's really selling me on octopus.
Now, to be fair with those points, cuttlefish, like, there's a cuttlefish that pretends to be a hermit crab.
That's true.
Like, cuttlefish also have the mimicry. They also have they have all the displays of the octopus, just a little less flexible bodies. I don't know if cuttlefish nest in the same area, but they all mate together, and I feel like they do nest within like an area of each other.
Right.
But I'm not sure on that. The giant cuttlefish I know has those big mating displays.
There is another option here, and we invoke the inherent incompleteness of the cephalopod fossil record.
Yes.
Of the squishy cephalopod fossil record, and say that our kraken is a relict member of a different group of cephalopods.
Absolutely.
That perhaps combine some of these features, that they have some of that displaying capability that we see in octopuses and cephalopods, that they have those long tentacles, which would especially be good if you're living down deep.
Yeah.
You can stay in one place and reach out for food in the nearby area without having to expend as much energy.
Well, and something that I just thought of, and you'll have to sell me on my own idea maybe. But you mentioned early on the idea of the armored cephalopods, that we could pull from some of those, either modern nautilus or some of the prehistoric ammonite and orthocone.
Oh yeah, the straight-shelled nautilus.
The straight-shelled orthocones is what I just thought of, because we don't know how long their arms were for the most part.
Right.
But orthocones were the cone-shelled, like long ice cream cones, some of them like 6 meters long. Massive. So if we got one of those a bit bigger, now that starts looking like a giant arm, as well as filling in the horns. Like if you see one of those shells pop out of the water, that's a horn spine. But if all I see is the silhouette of that coming toward me and then grabbing my vessel, I'm assuming that that's one arm, not an animal.
You sure could. I will say, it's harder to hide an orthocone from the fossil record.
It is true.
They've got those big hard shells.
That is very true. I mean, we have the deep sea helping us.
That's true.
If you're only coming into shallow waters really to mate and to feed every now and then, or even if it's mostly just to mate, then we do have the deep sea helping us against the fossil record.
That's true. I do like the idea of invoking shared ancestry to allow us to kind of take bits and pieces of what we like.
Oh yeah.
From the different groups and suggest we have a little bit of shared ancestry, a little bit of convergence to create something kind of nautiloid-like, kind of cuttlefish-like, kind of octopus-like, basically is an evolutionary excuse for us to be like, yeah, it's got all the features we like of each of those things.
It's very true. Yeah, like, there doesn't have to be one of the groups that's remaining, because Cephalopoda was huge.
Yes.
Massively diverse, and we only have a very... I mean, even though there's, like, tons of species in the group still around today, we only have the 4 main branches, and that's, really it.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, it could be something that's stayed hidden because of their soft nature.
Yeah.
All right, I do like that.
Which is a lot of fun.
I do
I
like that.
our mating season Kraken of Cutloctocones.
Yes. I'm pretty happy with that. I like that a lot. That's pretty cool.
I like it. It's a group of threat displaying, gregarious octopus or cuttlefish like cephalopods.
And since it's cephalopods, like, we don't even really have to explain what the males are doing. We don't even really have to explain what the males are doing during this time, because there may be some people who are like, all right, but you've accounted for the female as the Kraken. What about the males? Because some male cephalopods are like 100th the size of the female.
Oh yeah, they could be there.
Yeah, like the blanket octopus has a fairly large female. I don't know what the size is of a blanket octopus, but the male is minuscule. It is the largest size difference between male and female of any animal that I've ever heard of, and that's what I've always heard the record stated as. So yeah, we could have like little hitchhiking males. So it's only the females that you'd see.
In fact, we could even invoke hitchhiking males to get some of that horn texture on the bodies.
Yeah, absolutely.
If the males are hanging onto the outside of them, all right, now you have little horns.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that a lot. It's got a little bit of the male anglerfish thing going with it. Even if it's not a permanent attachment, we just suction cup to your back. And it's kind of got the male-female garter snake, where it's just a whole bunch of males hanging on. And then when it's time to mate, we all rush over and try to give you our sperm packet really quick.
My other thing that I really like about this, and we haven't talked about it because it's not really part of the Kraken mythos, but if we are creating an octopus, cuttlefish, squid type thing that is making intentional threat displays, there's also a light show going on.
Oh yeah, they're flashing. And
they're changing colors.
Mm-hmm.
There's got the stripes going up and down, which is something that I humbly suggest we add to the Kraken mythos.
Absolutely.
Because that's cooler and more monstrous.
It'd be terrifying.
It's got this hypnotic display going as the tentacles crawl up the side, or the arms, depending on what kind of cephalopod it is.
Yep. I like that a lot. Also, another point for cephalopods is most cephalopods, at least I guess another way to say it is, I don't know of one that doesn't die after mating.
Mm-hmm.
For cephalopods, mating is the end of their life.
Right.
Males die after they hand their sperm packet to the female, which is located in the tip of one of their arms, a specialized arm that they just give to her. And then the females typically guard the eggs for however long, months, weeks, I guess, for the smaller ones, and don't eat it all during that time, slowly starve to death, while also just naturally dying.
Right.
That's just the end of their lifespan, which could also tie nicely into the smell that is associated with surfacing krakens. Is if you have a mass die-off and corpses of rotting calamari at the surface that start attracting tons of fish.
You could also use that to explain the theoretical scenario where a bunch of people go, no, we saw a giant squid thing, and then they go, oh, let's go out and find it, and then they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not there.
It's dispersed, and we find some smaller ones washed up on beaches.
Yeah.
But we never find a kraken.
Very cool.
Oh, I'm pretty happy with this.
Add it to the spooky monster manual that we're slowly creating.
Awesome. So we have a descendant of some ancestral cephalopod that lives deep down, and the females come up to lay eggs and mate and travel as a large group known as a kraken.
Yep.
At which point they are both hunting aggressively to build up fat reserves, and then aggressively defending the nesting site from anything that comes too close.
Yeah, with all sorts of threat displays and texture and color displays and things like that.
Yeah, and if they're social during this, they can be coordinating so that they seem like one massive organism.
Right. So instead of what would be one 30, 40, 50, 60 foot very big cephalopod, looks like a cephalopod that is hundreds of feet wide.
That seems to just be everywhere at once. That no matter where you go, there's more arms over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I like that a lot. Very cool. Well, there you go, everyone. First Spook-E down, the Kraken.
The Kraken. More sea monsters to come. Hey, maybe some of our other sea monsters will be some of the predators that drove the cephalopods.
I was thinking that. I was like, I can't say because we haven't gotten to those. But I was thinking that
we haven't. I don't know that we've ever actually done this.
Connected
to create the Spook-E shared universe.
Yep.
Which some of our fans have invoked.
Yes.
This as a spooky verse of these creatures living together,
which is the dream.
That's
my end all goal. I'm doing it before I die.
So maybe we could invoke some of our other monsters.
So look forward to that, listeners.
3 more Saturdays remain in this month of October.
Yeah,
which means 3 more Spook-E episodes with 3 more sea monsters for us to tackle.
Check in a week for the next one.
Stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.